A warning before we start. This episode mentions child sexual abuse and exploitation. From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiet. It's Monday, September 9. After more than 2 years in office, no new homes have been constructed under the government's $32 billion housing plan. Labor promised to build 400,000 affordable homes under the scheme, but it's yet to dispense a single cent. Australian farmers are flocking to China in hopes of securing a slice of the nation's $80 billion economy. Officials have struck a deal for Aussie apple farmers to access the Chinese market less than a year after a historic visit by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. You can read that exclusive report by our correspondent on the ground in China right now at theaustralian.com.au. Managers of childcare centres where paedophile Ashley Paul Griffith raped and sexually abused almost 100 girls over a 20-year period were told not to admit their organisation was liable for his crimes. Plus, new evidence reveals Queensland Police waited several days to follow up a complaint that might have seen Griffith exposed sooner. That's today's episode.
I stopped to look into the bottom of the fort when I saw Ashley on his hands and knees, bent over a girl who was sleeping on her back. His face was up against hers and his mouth was moving along her mouth.
These are the chilling words written by a 26-year-old childcare worker in an email to her boss in late 2021. They're being read by a voice actor.
I quickly walked inside, shocked by what had just happened. I spoke with a female staff member, explaining what I had seen. My thoughts at this point were to go back out and save the child.
The childcare worker is detailing an incident she witnessed at the Brisbane Uniting Church Childcare Centre where she worked. The colleague she refers to in the email is Ashley Paul Griffith, who was her boss at the time. Within hours, the report was escalated to the centre's management and the childcare regulators. The next day, it was referred to the Queensland Police Child Protection Unit, but that's as far as it went. The cops wrote it up as a suspected child harm incident because the officers couldn't determine if physical contact had been made from their interview with the 26-year-old educator.
When I first came, it did look like he was kissing her, but when I didn't actually see any contact. But I don't know. He was kind of pecking his lips and his head was kind of moving.
It was a critical and devastating error by Queensland Police. That incident in a wooden children's fort in Brisbane was one of hundreds of instances of child sexual abuse and rape allegedly perpetrated by Ashley Paul Griffith over 2 decades. He would spend the next 10 months working at other childcare centres across Queensland before he was arrested and charged in 2022.
Today, I can outline the details of Operation Tenterfield, an investigation that has led to a former childcare worker being charged with 1,623 child abuse offences against 91 children, including 136 counts of rape and 110 counts of sexual intercourse with a child under 10 in Brisbane, Sydney and overseas between 2007 and 2022.
But it wasn't what transpired that afternoon in Brisbane that landed Griffith in cuffs. Victim identification experts from the Australian Federal Police Force had traced bedsheets that appeared in child abuse material on the dark web years earlier to a childcare centre where he previously worked. A search of his devices uncovered Griffith's decades-long campaign of horror. More than 4,000 images charting his crimes over his 20-year career in childcare.
We allege the 45-year-old man from the Gold Coast recorded all his alleged offending on his phone and cameras. The AFP is highly confident that all 87 Australian children who were recorded in the alleged child abuse material have been identified. The parents of the Australian children recorded in the alleged child abuse material have been informed of the investigation.
Last week, Ashley Paul Griffith pleaded guilty to 307 charges, including indecent treatment of children, creation and distribution of child exploitation material, and rape. It took 2.5 hours to read the charges to the packed courtroom, where family members of Griffith's 91 known victims openly sobbed. Other than a response of guilty to each of the charges, Griffith didn't speak, waiving his right to make a statement at the conclusion of the proceeding. The decision by Queensland Police not to pursue Ashley Paul Griffith following the report of the Fort incident meant Australia's worst paedophile evaded capture. After being cleared by police in 2021, he raped at least one more girl and sexually abused 3 others. The Queensland Police Service has defended its handling of the incident, saying all their procedures were followed. But today, the Australian's national crime correspondent, David Murray, is revealing it took police days to follow up the complaint.
So up until this point, we've had assurances from police that they've looked back over the investigations that were done into Griffith prior to his arrest. And there were 2 of those. 1, there was a complaint about this Ford incident. 2, there was another complaint about a young girl who said she'd been touched on the privates by Ashley Griffith, her teacher. These documents really raise more questions about how this initial complaint with the Ford incident was handled. So we can see that the Uniting Church, which manages this childcare centre, went to regulators that night and they forwarded on the email that this witness had sent them immediately. The next day, a manager from the church calls police on the police link line and reports it as a non-urgent matter, and it's taken up by a sergeant at a local police station. For some reason, it doesn't appear to have gone straight to a child protection and investigation unit, although they were asked for advice. And what happens is that it seems to water down from what is written in the initial email the day earlier, where she describes seeing this mouth against mouth scenario, and she is clearly shocked by it. In her email to her manager, she also details how Griffith had isolated kids. This wasn't a one-off. He was getting the kids into one area of the childcare centre and looking after them and splitting the kids. So other kids were in another area, and that had the effect of splitting supervision. So you'd have one manager on a break during nap time, another manager with the other kids in the other room, and then you'd have Griffith spending time alone with this group of kids who are sleeping. She raises that, I think, very specifically to let her managers know that this is potentially not a one-off incident. But when it goes to police the next day, the logs that I've cited state that we'll file this as a child harm report and someone will get back to you in a couple of days, maybe on the Monday or the Tuesday. Now, if you just think about this scenario, how often does a childcare worker come across something that disturbs them so much that they immediately tell a colleague, they report it in an email, they tell everyone up the chain that they're supposed to, that they're really alarmed by what they've seen. Yet there's no urgency from police for some reason after she talks to them. It's treated like something that can just be handled later because, oh, well, he's going to be suspended from the childcare centre while this is investigated. There's no kids at risk. As far as we know, and I've checked over and over again, police did not search his phone. They did not search his home. It was a month later before they actually sat down at the Child Protection and Investigation Unit and talked to this witness. And the question is, well, what happened? Why wasn't this treated potentially more seriously than it was? The police say all their policies were followed. Okay, are the policies right in that case? Were they actually followed? That's what we're trying to find out.
Now, the community wants answers.
This is the worst abuse this nation has ever seen in childcare centres. And there's been absolutely no sign of any kind of inquiry to get to the bottom of how that could happen, or whether the responses from the childcare centres, from the authorities, the police, the regulators, was up to scratch. What we're seeing in documents that I've cited is that 4 days after this report is made to police, the childcare centre's manager still hasn't heard from the Child Protection and Investigation Unit. Child protection advocates that I'm talking to, detectives, former detectives, they're saying, okay, we need to have a serious look at the way that this was handled, this whole scenario, because this is, as I said, one of the worst cases this country has ever seen of child abuse.
Also seen in those documents is advice from the Uniting Church's insurance expert about how staff should respond to inquiries from distraught parents.
Right at the time that the Uniting Church was finding out that there was an investigation into one of its former directors at a childcare centre, which was October of 2022, the communications manager in the church in Queensland at the time sent an email saying that a parent had inquired about getting money back, of getting fees refunded, of getting fees waived, and her question was, well, what are the insurance implications of that? And the church in Queensland's insurance advisor, its specialist, replied back that said it was a general requirement that the church does not admit liability in cases. Now, it wasn't detailed in these emails what the case was exactly, why they were being asked for their money back, but it was right in that time period that parents across the country were finding out that their kids had been abused at centres all over Brisbane, in New South Wales, in Italy, and were furious, demanding answers, were just completely in shock. And this again goes to the issue of openness. How does the public find out about what's happening? How do we get the truth if there's this general requirement? It wouldn't be unique to the church. It'd be insurance policies all over the place that require people just to not admit that you got it wrong. But this shows it in black and white, that this policy of the church at the time was in place, that they couldn't say, yeah, we're right for it.
Coming up, why police pursued a whistleblower and not the nation's worst child predator. Subscribers to The Australian hear exclusive stories like this one first. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back after this break.
I don't believe that is a problem with people who deliver the care. The problem is with the whole system. Obviously, this system is failing.
That's the voice of Yolanda Baruki. She was the Uniting Church's Manager of Early Learning Operations when paedophile Ashley Paul Griffith was observed leaning over a sleeping girl at one of its Brisbane childcare centres in 2021. She escalated the report made by the 26-year-old witness to her colleagues in senior management.
I am mum, I'm grandma. I could not even imagine what the parents of those children going through at the moment. The system failed them. The system failed also myself, and also all the people who've been working in this particular centre.
It was on this episode of A Current Affair, aired after Griffith was arrested and charged, that the Fort incident first became public knowledge.
We didn't keep quiet. We've been very clear something is wrong, but no one done anything about it.
Less than 2 weeks after the program went to air, detectives from Queensland's online child exploitation unit, known as Task Force Argos, appeared on Yolanda Baruki's doorstep with a search warrant in hand. They weren't there to thank her for her bravery in exposing the nation's worst child predator. Rather, they scooped up her phone and all internet-enabled devices and demanded access to their contents. Yolanda Baruki's employer said she'd accessed confidential information on a restricted computer and then handed it over to the producers of A Current Affair. She was arrested and charged with computer hacking on the same day as the detectives unexpectedly arrived at her home. She'll head to court for a hearing on the matter in November. And in the meantime, her blue card, also known as a Working with Children check, is understood to have been suspended. Here's David Murray.
When Griffith was first charged, we knew almost nothing, right? We were given information from the police, the basic facts of the number of victims, that he'd worked at a number of centres. We weren't actually even given his name because that was restricted under Queensland law at the time. Yolanda Baraki, when she spoke out, that was the first time we actually found out what happened in that scenario. We knew there had been some complaint to police, and this is so important for the public to know how these prior complaints were handled. And Yolanda Baraki shed some light on that. I think police should have been really mindful that this is a situation where everyone, the public, is on edge. There's kids being abused in childcare centres. There's questions over whether police have handled this correctly. It was a big call to go and then raid someone's house in the way that they did on a complaint from a church, which is itself, of course, will face naturally questions about whether it could have done more. We as journalists are faced with this constantly, where it's just very difficult to get information, and people are quite often scared to talk out. And when police come in and arrest, charge people who do speak to the media, it has an intimidating effect on other witnesses and other people who might want to talk. And the public does have a right to know of what happened in this situation. We can't just accept police statements from government agencies, from the police, saying that everything they did was fine. We need the facts, and then the public can decide for themselves.
David Murray is the Australian's national crime correspondent. You can read his full report right now at theaustralian.com.au.